Susan Miller pulled her thin jacket tighter as she hurried down the street toward Rosie's diner. The morning air was chilly, and her uniform didn't do much to keep her warm. She glanced at her watch and picked up her pace. Being late was not an option, not when she needed this job so badly. At 28, Susan's life wasn't anything like she had imagined it would be. She had dreamed of becoming a nurse, of helping people and making a difference. But life had other plans. First came the unexpected pregnancy, then her boyfriend left, and suddenly she was a single mom with bills to pay and a tiny daughter to support. "Morning, Betty," Susan called out as she entered through the back door of the diner. Betty, the cook who had been working at Rosie's for over 20 years, gave her a warm smile. "Morning, sunshine. You're just in time. The early birds are starting to come in." Susan hung up her jacket, quickly checked her appearance in the small mirror by the staff lockers, and tied her apron around her waist. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and despite the dark circles under her blue eyes, she practiced her best smile. Tips were better when you smiled, no matter how tired you were. "Is Lily doing okay?" Betty asked, flipping pancakes on the large grill. "She's good. My neighbor, Mrs. Martinez, is watching her." "Thank goodness for her, or I don't know what I'd do," Susan replied, grabbing her notepad and pen. The morning rush at Rosie's diner was predictable. The truck drivers came in first, ordering large breakfasts and endless cups of coffee. Then the factory workers from the plant down the road. After that, the retired couples who liked their toast lightly browned and their eggs over easy. Susan knew most of them by name, knew their orders by heart, and carried plates with practiced ease. "Coffee. Black for you, Mr. Henderson," she said, setting down a mug in front of an older man reading a newspaper. "And your oatmeal will be right up." "Thanks, Susan," he replied without looking up. "How's that little girl of yours?" "Growing like a weed," Susan answered with genuine pride. "She lost her first tooth yesterday." These small conversations were part of what made the job bearable. These people weren't just customers, they were almost like family. They asked about Lily, left decent tips, and sometimes even brought small gifts for her daughter during the holidays. It was just after 8 when the bell above the door chimed and Susan glanced up to see a stranger walk in. This wasn't unusual. Rosie's was just off the highway and they got their share of travelers passing through. But something about this man made her look twice. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe 5'10", with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His clothes weren't flashy, but Susan could tell they were expensive. A light gray suit, no tie, and shiny leather shoes that probably cost more than she made in a week. He carried a slim leather briefcase and moved with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. The man took a seat in the corner booth that had just been cleaned. Susan grabbed a menu and a fresh cup, making her way over to him. "Good morning, welcome to Rosie's," she said with her practiced smile. "Coffee?" The man looked up, and Susan noticed his eyes were a sharp, intelligent blue. They crinkled slightly at the corners when he returned her smile. "Yes, please. Black," he said, his voice deeper than she expected. Susan poured the coffee and placed the menu in front of him. "Special today is blueberry pancakes with a side of bacon. Take your time and I'll be back in a minute to take your order." As she moved to check on her other tables, Susan didn't give the man another thought. Rich guy passing through town, probably on his way to somewhere important. She had 6 other tables to worry about. The breakfast rush kept her moving non-stop for the next hour. Susan refilled coffees, brought out steaming plates, and cleared tables with the efficiency that came from 3 years of practice. She noticed that the man in the corner was in no hurry. He ordered the special, ate slowly, and seemed to be watching the diner with interest. "More coffee, sir?" Susan asked, stopping by his table. "Please," he said, closing the newspaper he'd been reading. "You're very good at your job." Susan blinked, surprised by the comment. "Thank you, it's nothing special, just waitressing." "Don't sell yourself short," the man replied. "I've been watching. You remember everyone's preferences, you're efficient and you're kind. That's not nothing." Susan felt herself blush slightly. "Just doing my job," she said, filling his cup. "Can I get you anything else?" "The check, please," he answered, folding. his newspaper. When Susan brought his bill, the man handed her a credit card. The name on it read Richard Grant. She ran the card and returned with his receipt. "Thank you for stopping by Rosie's," she said, the same line she said to every customer. Richard signed the receipt, leaving a tip that was generous but not outlandish. "Thank you, Susan," he said, having clearly read her name tag. "I enjoyed the breakfast and the service." Then he was gone, and Susan cleared his table, thinking nothing more of it as she prepared for the lunch crowd. The next day, Susan was surprised to see Richard Grant return. He came in at the same time, sat at the same booth, and ordered the same breakfast. "Passing through again?" Susan asked conversationally as she poured his coffee. "Actually, I'm in town for business," he replied. "Might be here for a few days." Susan nodded and went about her work. The diner was busy, and she had no time for idle chat with customers, no matter how well-dressed they were. During a rare quiet moment, Susan noticed Richard watching the other customers. He seemed particularly interested in her interactions with a young mother struggling with two small children. Susan had helped cut up the children's pancakes and had found some crayons in the back for them to draw with while their mother ate her breakfast in peace. "You're good with kids," Richard commented when she refilled his coffee. "I have a 6-year-old daughter," Susan replied. "I know how hard it can be to manage alone." Richard nodded thoughtfully, but didn't ask more questions. On the third day, Richard was back again. This time he arrived during a particularly hectic rush. One of the other waitresses had called in sick, and Susan was covering extra tables. She was rushing between orders, trying to keep up, when she accidentally bumped into a teenage busboy, causing him to drop a tray of dirty dishes. The crash was loud, and everyone turned to look. The poor boy turned bright red with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Bobby," Susan said quickly, already kneeling to help pick up the broken pieces. "It was my fault." "It's okay, Ms. Miller," the boy mumbled, clearly mortified. Susan quietly helped him clean up the mess, reassuring him that accidents happen and making sure he didn't cut himself on the broken plates. When they finished, she patted his shoulder and sent him back to work with a kind smile. What Susan didn't realize was that Richard Grant had watched the entire interaction with great interest. He observed how she took responsibility, how she treated the young busboy with respect, and how she managed to handle the situation without making a scene. When Susan finally made it to Richard's table with his coffee, she was flustered and apologetic. "I'm sorry for the wait," she said, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "No need to apologize," Richard replied. "You handled that situation very well." Susan gave a tired smile. Just another day at Rosie's. As Richard was leaving that day, he seemed to accidentally drop his wallet near the door. Susan, who was clearing a nearby table, noticed immediately. "Sir, sir," she called, rushing after him with the wallet in hand. "You dropped this." Richard turned, looking surprised. He took the wallet and opened it, checking the contents. "Everything seems to be there," he said, looking at Susan with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you, Susan. Honesty is a rare quality these days." "Just doing what anyone would do," she replied with a shrug. Richard smiled. "Not everyone would, believe me." He hesitated, then added, "I'll see you tomorrow morning." Susan nodded and returned to work, unaware that the seemingly ordinary customer who had been watching her for 3 days was about to change her life forever. What Susan Miller didn't know was that Richard Grant wasn't just a wealthy businessman passing through town. He was a billionaire with a foundation dedicated to helping hardworking people who showed exceptional character despite difficult circumstances. And Susan had just passed his first test. The next morning, Susan woke up with a slight headache. Lily had been up late with a bad dream, and Susan had held her daughter until she fell back asleep. Now, as she prepared breakfast in their small apartment kitchen, she glanced at the clock. She had exactly 45 minutes to get Lily ready, drop her off at Mrs. Martinez's apartment, and make it to Rosie's for her morning shift. "Lily, sweetheart." "Time to get up," Susan called, pouring cereal into a chipped bowl. Lily appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair tangled from sleep, clutching a worn teddy bear. At 6 years old, she had her mother's blue eyes and the same stubborn chin. I don't want cereal again, Lily complained, climbing onto a kitchen chair. Susan sighed. I know, baby. But we're in a hurry this morning. I promise we'll have pancakes on Sunday. As they rushed through their morning routine, Susan's mind kept drifting to the man who had been visiting the diner. There was something different about him. Most customers barely noticed her beyond taking their orders, but Richard Grant seemed to actually see her. After dropping Lily off, Susan hurried to work. The morning was cold, and dark clouds threatened rain. She hoped the weather wouldn't keep customers away. Slow days meant fewer tips, and she needed every penny. When she arrived at Rosie's, Betty was already busy in the kitchen. You look tired, honey, Betty commented, mixing pancake batter. Lily had nightmares again, Susan explained, tying her apron. I think she's worried about the school field trip next week. It costs $30, and she knows money is tight. Betty frowned. You work too hard, Susan. You're wearing yourself out. Susan shrugged. What choice do I have? Lily deserves better than what I had growing up. The morning rush began, and Susan fell into her familiar routine. Regular customers greeted her by name, and she remembered their usual orders without asking. By 9 o'clock, the diner was packed, and Susan moved quickly between tables. True to his word, Richard Grant arrived at his usual time and took his regular booth. Susan brought him coffee without being asked. Good morning, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. Richard studied her face. Long night? Susan was surprised by the personal question but nodded. My daughter had trouble sleeping. How old is your daughter? Richard asked. 6, Susan replied. Her name is Lily. That's a beautiful name, Richard said. You must be proud of her. She's everything to me, Susan admitted, then quickly added, the special today is cinnamon French toast. Would you like to try it? Richard ordered the special, and Susan moved on to her other tables. Throughout the morning, she noticed him watching not just her, but everyone in the diner. He seemed to be observing how people interacted, the rhythm of the place, the small dramas of everyday life. During a quiet moment, Susan noticed Richard writing something in a small notebook. She wondered if he was a food critic or maybe a writer researching for a book. That might explain his interest in the diner and its people. When the lunch crowd began to arrive, Richard paid his bill and left. Susan was surprised to find another, generous but not suspicious tip. She pocketed the money gratefully, thinking of Lily's field trip fee. The rest of Susan's shift was busy. A large group of construction workers came in for lunch, and a family with 3 rowdy children made a mess that took ages to clean up. By the time her shift ended at 3, Susan was exhausted. You look dead on your feet, Joe, the manager, commented as Susan hung up her apron. I'm fine, she insisted. Just need a little rest. Joe hesitated, then said, Listen, Susan, I know things are tight for you. If you ever need an advance on your paycheck. Susan shook her head firmly. Thanks, Joe, but I'm managing, really. She didn't tell him that her car needed repairs she couldn't afford, or that the rent on their apartment was going up next month. Pride kept her silent. She had grown up watching her own mother accept handouts, and Susan had promised herself she would stand on her own 2 feet. As Susan was leaving, Joe called her back. Almost forgot. Someone left this for you. He handed her a sealed envelope with her name written on it. The handwriting was neat and precise. Who left it? Susan asked, turning the envelope over. Joe shrugged. That guy who's been coming in for breakfast, the one in the fancy suit. Susan frowned, opening the envelope right there. Inside was a note and something else that made her gasp. 5 crisp $100 bills. The note read, I noticed you mentioning your daughter's field trip. Please accept this small gift for Lily. No strings attached. Richard Grant. Susan's hands trembled. $500 wasn't just field trip money, it was car repair money, it was breathing room. Everything okay? Joe asked, noticing her reaction. Susan quickly folded the note, hiding the money. Yes, fine. Just a thank you note from a customer. She tucked the envelope into her. Person left the diner, her mind racing. Why would a stranger give her so much money? It didn't make sense. And how did he know about Lily's field trip? She had only mentioned it to Betty this morning, and Richard had been sitting halfway across the diner. That evening, after picking up Lily from Mrs. Martinez, Susan sat at their small kitchen table staring at the money. It would solve so many immediate problems: the field trip, the car repair, maybe even a new pair of shoes for Lily. But something didn't feel right. Susan had never taken charity, and she wasn't about to start now. Besides, she barely knew Richard Grant. Why would he give her money? What did he want in return? The next morning, Susan arrived at work early. She had the envelope in her purse, determined to return it when Richard came for breakfast. But he didn't come. Susan kept glancing at the door throughout her shift, but there was no sign of him. By the end of the day, she felt both relieved and disappointed. Richard didn't appear the next day either, or the day after that. A week passed, and Susan began to think she would never see him again. The envelope remained in her purse, untouched. Then, on Friday afternoon, just as Susan was finishing her shift, Joe called her into his office. "Susan, there's someone here who wants to speak with you," he said, looking unusually serious. Susan followed Joe into the small office at the back of the diner. Sitting in a chair by the desk was Richard Grant. He stood when she entered, and Susan noticed he was even more formally dressed than before, in a dark blue suit that looked expensive. "Hello, Susan," he said with a smile. "I think it's time we had a proper conversation." Susan immediately reached into her purse and pulled out the envelope. "Mr. Grant, I can't accept this money. It's very generous, but—" Richard held up a hand, stopping her. "That's actually why I'm here. I owe you an explanation." Joe cleared his throat. "I'll leave you two to talk," he said, closing the door as he left. Susan stood awkwardly, still holding the envelope. "I don't understand what's going on." Richard gestured to a chair. "Please sit down. What I have to tell you might come as a shock." Susan sat down slowly, still clutching the envelope with the money. Her heart beat fast as she looked at Richard Grant. His face was kind but serious, and she suddenly felt nervous. What could this well-dressed stranger possibly want with her? "First, let me properly introduce myself," Richard said. "My name is Richard Grant. I own Grant Enterprises." The name sounded vaguely familiar to Susan, but she couldn't place it. She nodded politely, waiting for him to continue. Grant Enterprises is a large company that owns hotels, hospitals, and technology businesses across the country, Richard explained. "But that's not why I'm here today." Susan frowned. "I don't understand. Why have you been watching me?" Richard smiled gently. 3 months ago, my foundation received a letter about you. The Second Chance Foundation looks for special people who work hard, show strong character, and deserve an opportunity they might not otherwise get. "A letter about me?" Susan repeated, confused. "From who?" "From your neighbor, Mrs. Martinez," Richard said. "She wrote that you were the hardest working single mother she had ever known. She told us how you dropped out of nursing school when you got pregnant, how your boyfriend left, and how you've been working double shifts to give your daughter a good life." Susan felt her face grow warm. The idea that Mrs. Martinez had been writing letters about her to some foundation was embarrassing. She had never wanted to be anyone's charity case. "Mrs. Martinez had no right to share my personal business," Susan said stiffly. Richard nodded. "I understand your pride, Susan, but Mrs. Martinez cares about you. She sees how hard you work and how much potential you have. She wasn't asking for a handout for you. She was asking for an opportunity." Susan was silent, trying to process what was happening. "So you came to the diner to, what, check me out?" "Yes," Richard admitted. "The foundation receives thousands of nominations each year. We can only help a few people. So we investigate carefully. I wanted to see for myself what kind of person you are." "By watching me wait tables?" Susan asked, still confused. Richard leaned forward in his chair. "By watching how you treat people, how you handle stress, how you solve problems, your honesty when I dropped my wallet, your kindness to that young busboy when he broke the dishes, the way you help customers without being asked. These things tell me more about a person than any resume could." Susan didn't know what to say. She had never thought of her ordinary workday as some kind of test. She just did her job the best she could. "What exactly does your foundation do, Mr. Grant?" she finally asked. "We invest in people," Richard said simply. "People with character and potential who just need a chance, and I believe you are one of those people, Susan." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "The Second Chance Foundation would like to offer you an opportunity. Not charity," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "An investment in your future and in your daughter's future." Susan glanced at the folder but didn't reach for it. "What kind of opportunity?" "You wanted to be a nurse once," Richard said. "You completed 2 years of nursing school before you had to drop out. We want to help you finish your education." Susan felt a sharp pang of longing. Nursing had been her dream since she was a teenager. She had kept all her old textbooks, sometimes reading them late at night after Lily was asleep, holding on to a dream that seemed impossible now. "I can't go back to school," she said quietly. "I have Lily to take care of. I have bills to pay. I can't just quit my job." Richard nodded. "That's exactly why most people can't pursue their dreams. Life gets in the way. That's where we come in." He opened the folder and showed her what was inside. "The foundation will provide a full scholarship to complete your nursing degree. We'll also provide a monthly stipend to cover your basic living expenses while you study. And most importantly, we'll arrange quality childcare for Lily." Susan stared at the papers in shock. It was everything she needed. Everything she had wished for on lonely nights when the dream seemed so far away. But it couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't even know me." Richard's eyes were kind as he answered. "Because I was once where you are now. A single parent working multiple jobs, struggling to get by. Someone gave me a chance. Now I do the same for others." He paused, then added, "And because the world needs more nurses like you would be. Someone who cares about people, who notices what they need, who treats everyone with respect." Susan's mind was racing. It seemed too good to be true. "What's the catch?" she asked bluntly. "There must be conditions." Richard smiled, appreciating her directness. "There are conditions, yes. You must maintain good grades. You must complete the program within 3 years. And after you graduate and begin working as a nurse, you must mentor other single parents who want to pursue education. Pay it forward, so to speak." Susan looked down at her hand, still holding the envelope with the $500. "And this money?" she asked, holding it up. "That was a personal gift," Richard said. "Not from the foundation, just from one parent to another, for your daughter's field trip and whatever else she needs, no strings attached." Susan felt tears forming in her eyes, but she blinked them away. She never cried in front of others. It was a rule she had made for herself years ago. "This is overwhelming," she said honestly. "I need time to think." Richard nodded. "Of course, take the folder home. Read through everything, talk to Lily. This is a big decision." He stood up and handed her a business card. "Call me when you've decided. Whatever you choose, it was a pleasure to meet you, Susan Miller." As Richard turned to leave, Susan found her voice again. "Mr. Grant," she called after him. "Thank you. Even if I decide not to accept, thank you for believing I could be more than just a waitress." Richard smiled. "You were never just a waitress, Susan. That's what I saw the moment I walked into this diner." After he left, Susan sat alone in the office for a long time, staring at the folder in her hands. Inside was a chance to change her life and Lily's future, but it was also scary. School had been hard the first time, and now she was older, more tired, with more responsibilities. When she finally left the diner that evening, Susan walked slowly to Mrs. Martinez's apartment to pick up Lily. Her mind was full of questions and possibilities. Could she really go back to school? Could she handle the coursework while being a good mother to Lily? What if she failed? Mrs. Martinez opened the door with a warm smile, but her expression changed when she saw Susan's face. "You met Mr. Grant?" she said. Not a question, but a statement. Susan nodded. You wrote to his foundation about me. Mrs. Martinez invited Susan inside. Lily was in the living room drawing pictures with colorful markers, happily unaware of how her life might soon change. I hope you're not angry, Mrs. Martinez said quietly. I've watched you struggle for years. You deserve a chance, Susan. Susan looked at her daughter, then back at her elderly neighbor. Why didn't you tell me? Because you would have said no. Mrs. Martinez replied simply, You're too proud to ask for help, but sometimes help finds you anyway. Susan sighed. I don't know what to do. It's a big change. Mrs. Martinez patted her hand. You know exactly what to do. You're just scared. That's normal. Susan watched Lily coloring, her small face focused on her drawing. What if I fail? What if you fly? Mrs. Martinez countered. What if you become the nurse you always wanted to be? What if Lily grows up seeing her mother follow her dreams? Susan felt something shift inside her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Later, that night after Lily was asleep, Susan opened the folder and read every page carefully. The offer was real. The Second Chance Foundation would pay for everything: tuition, books, a living stipend, childcare. All she had to do was study hard and complete the program. She looked at her daughter's sleeping face, so peaceful and trusting. Lily deserved a mother she could be proud of, a mother who didn't just survive but thrived. Susan reached for her phone and Richard Grant's business card. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed the number. Hello, Mr. Grant, she said when he answered. This is Susan Miller. I've made my decision. 2 weeks after Susan accepted Richard Grant's offer, her life began to change. She gave Joe her 2 weeks' notice at the diner. He was sad to see her go, but happy for her opportunity. Betty hugged her tight and promised to visit. The regular customers gave her a card signed by everyone and a small gift of money they had collected. I can't believe this is happening, Susan told Mrs. Martinez as they sat in Susan's small living room surrounded by paperwork. Sometimes I think I'll wake up and find out it was all a dream. Mrs. Martinez smiled. It's real, Susan. You earned this chance. The Second Chance Foundation moved quickly. They helped Susan enroll in the nursing program at the local community college to finish her degree. They found a small but nice 2-bedroom apartment closer to the school, with a park nearby for Lily. They arranged for Lily to attend a good daycare center while Susan was in class. Susan's first day back at school was terrifying. She felt old, compared to the other students, many of whom had come straight from high school. Her hands shook as she opened her new textbooks. What if she had forgotten everything she learned before? What if she couldn't keep up? Mom, are you scared? Lily asked that evening, watching Susan study at their new kitchen table. Susan looked up from her notes and smiled at her daughter. A little bit. New things can be scary. Lily nodded wisely. Like my new school. But you said being scared is okay as long as you try anyway. Susan's heart swelled with love for her smart little girl. That's right. Being brave isn't about not feeling scared, it's about feeling scared and doing it anyway. The first few weeks were hard. Susan's brain felt rusty, and juggling school and motherhood was exhausting. Some nights she fell asleep, with her face in her textbooks. Some mornings she wanted to give up and go back to the familiar routine of the diner. But slowly, things began to click into place. Susan remembered why she had wanted to be a nurse in the first place. She loved learning how the human body worked. She enjoyed practicing skills in the lab. Most of all, she liked knowing that one day she would help people when they needed it most. 1 month into the program, Richard Grant invited Susan and Lily to have dinner with him and his wife Laura. They met at a nice restaurant that Susan would never have been able to afford before. Susan was nervous, but Richard and Laura were kind and down to earth. How are your classes going? Laura asked after they had ordered their food. It's challenging, Susan admitted, but in a good way. I'd forgotten how much I love learning. Richard smiled. The foundation doesn't just pick people who need help. We pick people who will make the most of an opportunity. I knew you would work hard. I still can't believe you chose me, Susan said honestly. There must be thousands of people who need help. There are, Richard nodded. But not everyone has what it takes to succeed. You do. I saw it at the diner. The way you managed everything, remembered every detail, cared for every customer. Those are the qualities of an excellent nurse. Lily, who had been quietly coloring on the children's menu, looked up. My mom is going to be the best nurse ever, she announced confidently. The adults laughed, and Susan felt a warm glow of pride. For the first time in years, her daughter was proud of her for something more than just being a good mom. Lily was seeing her work toward a dream. After dinner, as they were saying goodbye, Richard handed Susan an envelope. What's this? She asked, confused. The foundation already paid for everything she needed. Open it later, Richard said with a smile. It's not from the foundation. It's a personal gift from Laura and me. When Susan got home and opened the envelope, she gasped. Inside were 2 tickets to the Children's Museum that Lily had been begging to visit, along with a gift card for a toy store. A note read, "Every hard-working student and her daughter deserve a fun day off. Enjoy. Richard and Laura." Tears filled Susan's eyes. This wasn't about money or education anymore. This was about people who cared about her and Lily as individuals, people who wanted them to be happy, not just successful. The next few months fell into a rhythm. Susan went to classes during the day while Lily was at daycare. They did homework together in the evenings. Susan with her nursing textbooks, Lily with her first-grade worksheets. On weekends, they explored their new neighborhood and sometimes met with Richard and Laura for lunch or a visit to the park. Susan made friends with other students in her program, including several other single parents. They formed a study group that met twice a week, helping each other with difficult material and taking turns watching the children. One day, about 6 months into the program, Richard called Susan with an exciting opportunity. The hospital that partners with your school needs volunteers for their community health fair this weekend, he explained. I thought you might be interested. Susan was definitely interested. The health fair would give her a chance to see what real nurses did in the community. She arranged for Mrs. Martinez to watch Lily and signed up right away. The health fair was busy and exciting. Susan helped at the blood pressure screening station, working alongside a registered nurse named Grace, who had been at the hospital for 20 years. You have a good touch with people, Grace commented, watching Susan explain high blood pressure to an elderly man in simple, clear terms. How far along are you in your program? Just 6 months, Susan replied. I still have a lot to learn. Grace nodded. The technical stuff comes with time and practice, but the way you connect with patients, that's something special. You can't really teach that. By the end of the day, Susan was tired but exhilarated. This was the work she had dreamed of doing, helping people understand their health, making a difference in their lives. As she was packing up the information brochures, she noticed Richard Grant talking to the hospital's chief of nursing. They both looked over at her, and then the chief of nursing nodded and smiled. Later, as Susan was leaving, Richard caught up with her in the parking lot. You did wonderful work today, he said. Everyone was impressed. Susan smiled, pleased by the praise. I loved every minute of it. This is really what I want to do with my life. I have some news, Richard said. I just spoke with Jane Morris, the chief of nursing. She's very interested in you. If you maintain your current grades, she's willing to offer you a part-time position as a nurse's aide during your 2nd year. It would give you valuable experience and could lead to a full-time nursing position after graduation. Susan couldn't believe what she was hearing. A potential job at this excellent hospital? It was more than she had dared to hope for. How did you arrange that? She asked, amazed once again by Richard's influence. Richard shook his head. I didn't arrange anything. I simply introduced you. Your work today, your grades, your dedication. Those are what impressed Jane. This is all you, Susan. For the first time, Susan truly believed it. She was earning this new life through her own hard work and ability. Richard had given her a chance, but she was the one making the most of it. As she drove home to pick up Lily from Mrs. Martinez, Susan could hardly contain her excitement. Just 1 year ago, she had been a tired waitress with a fading dream. Now she was a nursing student with a bright future ahead, all because a billionaire had seen something special in her when no one else was looking. That night, as she tucked Lily into bed, her daughter asked a question. "Mom, are you happy now?" Susan smiled and brushed Lily's hair back from her forehead. "Yes, sweetie, I'm very happy." "Me too," Lily said sleepily. "I like our new life." Susan kissed her daughter's cheek. "I like our new life too, and it's only going to get better." 3 years passed quickly. Susan worked harder than she ever had before. She studied late into the night after Lily went to bed. She spent weekends in the library with her study group. She worked part-time at the hospital during her 2nd year, learning from experienced nurses who became her mentors. There were hard days. Days when Lily got sick and Susan had to miss classes. Days when the material seemed too difficult to understand. Days when she was so tired she could barely keep her eyes open. But there were also wonderful days. The day she aced her pharmacology exam. The day she successfully inserted her first IV on a real patient. The day Lily's teacher told her that Lily had announced to the entire class that her mom was going to be a nurse who helped sick people get better. Richard and Laura Grant remained part of their lives. They didn't just provide money through the foundation. They provided friendship and support. They came to Lily's school plays. They invited Susan and Lily to their home for holidays when they had nowhere else to go. They became the family that Susan had never had. Now, on a bright May morning, Susan stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, hardly recognizing herself. She wore a crisp white graduation gown with blue cords indicating her high honors status. Her blonde hair was neatly styled, and there was a confidence in her eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago. "Mom, you look beautiful," Lily exclaimed, bouncing on the bed in her new dress. At 9 years old, Lily had grown tall and smart, thriving in the stable life they now had. "Thank you, sweetie," Susan said, smiling at her daughter. "Are you excited?" "For today?" "Yes." Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Richard and Laura are picking us up, right? And Mrs. Martinez is coming too?" "That's right," Susan confirmed. "Everyone who helped us get here will be there to watch me graduate." The doorbell rang, and Lily ran to answer it. Susan heard her daughter's excited greeting, and Richard's warm voice responding. She took one last look in the mirror, thinking about how far she had come from the tired waitress at Rosie's diner. Richard and Laura were waiting in the living room. Laura gave Susan a warm hug. "We are so proud of you," she said, her eyes shining. "Graduating with honors while raising a child, you're amazing, Susan." Richard nodded in agreement. "I knew you would succeed, but even I didn't imagine how well you would do." They picked up Mrs. Martinez on the way to the ceremony. The elderly woman squeezed Susan's hand. "Didn't I tell you? I knew you could fly." The graduation ceremony was held in the college's large auditorium. Susan sat with her classmates, many of whom had become close friends. When they called her name, she walked across the stage with her head held high. Susan Miller, Bachelor of Science in Nursing, graduating with high honors. She heard Lily's voice above the applause. "That's my mom." After the ceremony, as they celebrated with a special lunch, Richard had news to share. "I spoke with Jane Morris at the hospital yesterday," he said. "She's offering you a full-time position in the pediatric unit after you pass your licensing exam. She says you're one of the most promising new nurses she's seen in years." Susan was overwhelmed. The pediatric unit was exactly where she wanted to work. She would be caring for children, making a difference in their lives when they were most vulnerable. "I don't know how to thank you," she said to Richard and Laura. "Without you, none of this would have happened." Richard shook his head. "We only opened a door. You walked through it on your own power. Your success is your own achievement, Susan." A week after graduation, Susan passed her licensing exam on the first try. She was now officially a registered nurse. She started her new job at the hospital the following month, earning more than twice what she had made as a waitress. For the first time in her life, she had financial security. With her first real paycheck, Susan took Lily shopping for new school clothes and then to her favorite restaurant for dinner. As they walked home, Lily held her mother's hand. "Mom, are we rich now?" Lily asked curiously. Susan laughed. "Not rich, honey, but we have enough. We don't have to worry about money all the time anymore." Lily was quiet for a moment, then said, "I liked you when you were a waitress, too. You worked really hard." Susan squeezed her daughter's hand. "Thank you, sweetie. That means a lot to me." 6 months into her new job, Susan was thriving. The hospital staff respected her skills and compassion. The children she cared for responded to her gentle approach. The parents trusted her with their most precious treasures, their sick children. One evening, Richard and Laura invited Susan and Lily to dinner at their home. After the meal, Richard took Susan aside to talk privately. "The foundation is growing," he explained. "We're helping more people than ever before, but we need something new. We need people who have been through the program to mentor new recipients." Susan understood immediately. "You want me to help someone else, the way you helped me?" Richard nodded. "Exactly. There's a young man, a single father with 2 children. He was a medic in the army but couldn't afford to go back to school for nursing after his wife died. The foundation will provide the same support you received, but he needs someone who understands the challenges he'll face." "I'd be honored to help," Susan said without hesitation. "When can I meet him?" A week later, Susan sat in a coffee shop waiting nervously. She had prepared materials, advice, and encouragement for the new recipient of the foundation's help. When a young man with 2 small children entered the shop, looking just as nervous as she felt, Susan stood and waved him over. "You must be Dan," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Susan Miller." Dan shook her hand, his expression relieved but still anxious. "Thank you for meeting me. I'm still trying to believe this is real. Things like this don't happen to people like me." Susan smiled, remembering her own disbelief 3 years ago. "I said the exact same thing when I was in your position. Let me tell you my story." As she shared her journey from waitress to nurse, she saw hope growing in Dan's eyes. She told him about the hard days and the wonderful days. She gave practical advice about studying with children at home. Most importantly, she let him know that he wasn't alone. That night, as Susan tucked Lily into bed, her daughter asked a question that made her pause. "Mom, are you happy that Richard watched you at the diner that day?" Susan thought about how much their lives had changed, from struggling to make rent in a tiny apartment to having a stable home and meaningful career, from feeling stuck to feeling purposeful, from just surviving to truly living. "Yes," she answered honestly. "That day changed our lives forever. But you know what's most important?" "What?" Lily asked sleepily. "That we appreciate our good fortune by helping others when we can, just like Richard helped us." Lily nodded. "Like you're helping Dan now." "Exactly," Susan said, kissing her daughter's forehead. "That's how good spreads in the world. One person helps another, who helps another, and on and on." As Susan turned off the light and closed Lily's bedroom door, she thought about the tired waitress she had been. That woman never could have imagined the life she had now, all because a billionaire had watched her work, seen her potential, and decided to change her life forever. Now it was her turn to watch for others who deserved a chance. Her turn to change lives. And that felt even better than having her own life changed.